I think how you measure success with this kind of work is a complicated question, but not necessarily a difficult one. I mean, if you go into these stories with the expectation that you're going to single-handedly change the world, I think that may be a frustrating experience. But I think there are all sorts of little micro steps that acknowledge that people are resonating with the story or with content or something that you've created, and I don't think that you need 10 million likes or to reach thousands and thousands of people to be effective. I think with the kind of work that we do to try to tell stories about important issues, that even reaching a small number of influential people may be just as effective as something that reaches much more broadly.
Yeah, I guess I would echo that. To kind of give a small example, we have a friend that works for an organization called Sightline Institute, and his name is Eric DePlace, and he always says that when he's Sightline Institute is kind of an environmental think tank, and they write a lot of kind of like environmental reports, I guess, on things. And when he's writing his reports and his blogs, he always says, like, when I write those, I write for two people, two individual people that he actually identifies as who his audience are. And I think that's a really great example of how you can be effective, is knowing your audience, and like, rather than trying to reach the general public and make some sort of like a general difference, of really kind of being specific with that. And I think that in the end can be more meaningful.
Well, I think one of the actually most difficult things is personal work in some ways, because it's the least defined. It's just you in your own head in some ways, and you're in a position where some days you're going to get up in the morning and you think, this is the craziest idea. I have no idea why I'm trying to make this happen, and I don't see how it's ever going to work out. And I think that's one of the reasons that organizations like Blue Earth have been tremendously valuable to us, because in some ways it's a form of reassurance that you're not totally crazy, that there are other people out there who are getting up and having those exact same thoughts, and that they're finding ways to get the pieces together and get the story told and get the story out there, and it's possible to do that. So I really believe in shared misery is one way to put it, but it's also a tremendous sense of optimism to know that there are other people like you out there that are trying to tell important stories for good reasons.
I would echo that hugely. Yeah, that community has been enormous to us, and it's so supportive. And as far as, every time you get, rejected, a rejection letter from a grant you applied for, every time you get back from a bunch of field work and just feel like, I'm so frustrated, like I could have done better, I know I can do better. Like, I think talking through kind of those sorts of issues with other people that are trying to do similar things, and realizing that, like, everybody is struggling with this stuff, and everybody has bad days and good days has been huge for us. Getting advice from people that have been doing this a lot longer than we have, whether it's advice on, like, how to do your taxes, or advice on equipment, or advice on how to, ask a good question in an interview, or all sorts of things.
It's not formalized. We are starting a listserv, so there will be a listserv soon. But it's mostly been through old-fashioned networking, because in many ways it's a family. It's a group of like-minded photographers who are trying to make something happen. And within that group, there's probably someone who's had to solve the problem that you're faced with, and so it's tremendously valuable to have other people to turn to ask and to learn from.
Well, I think that, I guess, two things that I could talk about. One is how we end up researching projects, and then how we end up kind of carrying those out a little bit. So the first is that in researching our projects, we generally kind of do general background research, and then a lot of times what we'll do is find different organizations that are working on the issues, because, you know, generally we're just starting out and learning about something. Say, like right now we're working on a story about climate change and stormwater, and I haven't done a whole lot of thinking about stormwater before, so the way that I'll go about doing that is kind of doing some general, you know, background research on the internet, and then picking up the phone and calling, you know, all the organizations that I find in the area that are working on stormwater issues, and I'll talk to them and say, like, you know, what are your biggest challenges? What are you facing? What do you know? Like, do you have story ideas? Who should I talk to? And I think that process is hugely applicable to all kinds of, you know, things that other people do and we have to do in our lives. And then once we're actually kind of working on the story, once we kind of narrow down like what the story is and who we want to work with, and we're working on this story, it's so much about kind of building friendships and alliances and kind of figuring out, okay, how do we work together to tell this story, and building trust with each other, and that whole kind of process of collaborating with your subject, I think, is hugely translatable to all kinds of things that we need to do in real life.
Yeah, I would say that the very nature of our job is to insert ourselves into situations that we know nothing about, and embracing the unknown, because that's what's interesting. I mean, that's, you're trying to create images and stories that people haven't seen before, and in some ways it can be daunting to always be in situations that are in some ways uncomfortable. I mean, they're outside of your familiar routine, but I think also embracing that unknown is a tremendous source of strength, and getting comfortable living in a space where you don't exactly know how things are going to turn out is something that I think is relevant to lots of different jobs and lots of different people and communities all over. We use characters as access points to bigger issues. Pretty much all our work is character driven, and so it's about building relationships, as Sarah says, building trust with those people, because ultimately, I mean, any story you're telling, you're working together with your characters to tell it. There's nothing adversarial about it. They are a equal member of the team.
Well, it very much depends, you know, if it's something like, say it's a project that's happening in our own communities, and maybe we kind of know some of the people, or we know of some of the people, then like the kind of getting to know each other process can happen rather quickly. You know, we just kind of say what our goals are and talk to them about, you know, any goals or concerns that they may have, and just kind of start right in on. A lot of times it's just something as simple as like us documenting what that person does, and then talking to them about why that matters, you know. But if it's something like you're going to, you know, northern Norway to work with the Sami people, and you've never been there before, and you don't know anything about them, and you know, with something like that, it's going to take a lot longer to kind of be in that place and build friendships and alliances that would allow you to do that, to be able to kind of become a part of someone's personal life in that way. So it really depends on kind of what the subject matter is.
I would approach that from a slightly different way, and that is, I think most people know how to make friends and build relationships with someone. I think the hardest part is figuring out who you want to build a relationship with, is finding the characters who can actually carry your story. That's the part that makes you feel like you're back in 7th grade and no one wants to talk to you anymore.
It's a huge part of our work.
It's a huge, hard part of this kind of work.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
tenacity.
Yeah.
Like you just have to, yeah, keep going to school every day until you make a buddy. I don't know. Yeah.
Yep.
I know, yeah, there's no good, easy formula. Sometimes that takes just a huge amount of time. Yes. I think that everywhere we've been, people have cell phones. So the Sami reindeer herders are a great example. They all have cell phones. I mean, they're semi-nomadic people, right? They move around and herd reindeer, but they're from season to season. They're in different places, but they're moving around by like ATVs and helicopters, and they definitely use cell phones, and they're using a lot of modern technologies. They're also sleeping on skins and tents. I mean, it's I think that today a lot of people have access to pictures, although I still think some of the places we go, people are certainly like interested in the pictures that we're taking and in your cameras and that sort of thing. And we often, make a definite direct point of sending photos back to the people that we work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, cameras may be ubiquitous in lots of places around the world, but that doesn't mean that images are valued equally in all those places. And I think in some communities, it can be a pretty big deal to get images back of families and whatnot.
So would you say they're more valued?
Well, yeah, because they're less accessible than, say, in certain parts of Africa that we've been in compared to what we experience in the States.
So you go into someone's house in an igloo or a mud hut, and you'll find photographs on the walls in places in the middle of nowhere.
More cell phones, I think. Less like having a printed photograph is more rare than having photographs on cell phones.
I don't know much about it. My guess is there's a huge amount of images that are only on cell phones and moving between cell phones, and that's their entire existence. But it's not something I've done a lot of thinking about.